the coach of the year, Brian Daboll.
Yep.
I don't necessarily agree with this. I get why he's the coach of the year with the Giants having no expectations, but he still was the third worst team in his division. And there was another coach in his division who I feel like coached a better overall season where the Eagles elevated to Super Bowl caliber level within 2 years under Nick Sirianni. And I feel like it's fair to put Brian Dable there and give him the award, but this is the one award where I feel like either Sirianni or Andy Reid deserve this award over Brian Daboll, just for the fact with how dominant they were and how much it had to do with his offensive schemes and the systems he put in place. I get resurrecting Daniel Jones and the Giants is a big deal, but I feel like giving it to a barely above 500 team versus a team who was the most dominant team in their conference, it's a little bit of a stretch for me.
See, I think that he deserved it because of how much he overperformed. Because I think the Eagles, even if they weren't the expected to be the number one seed, I think they were expected to be a playoff team. And the Chiefs, they were expected to be right there too. Maybe regress slightly. But with the Giants, I mean, I thought that they were going to win 3 games this year. And then Daniel Jones, we thought that this was like his final swan song. And he played good enough that the Giants have to consider bringing him back. So I think with coach of the year, it's kind of like it's less about who's the best coach of the league and it's more like who outperformed expectations. And I think if we live by that metric, I think Dayball and you can throw out Doug Peterson too. I think Doug Peterson, I believe, finished second in the votes.
Yeah.
Um, and I think those two guys, Doug Peterson, though, I feel like was less surprising because he was a Super Bowl winning head coach. So for that one, I understand the vision with Brian Dayball. I think maybe I think Doug Peterson deserves it for how they turn things around. I also feel like Dan Campbell might have deserved a shout out too, just for how they
Yeah.
started. But Brian Daboll, I mean, they had a great season, and the fact that they even were above 500 was amazing because they didn't have any receivers, and Daniel Jones is Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I still feel like when Stefanski won it, at least he won 11 games, right?
Yep.
Like the Giants won what 9 games this year? They were 9-8-1.
9-7-1 because they had a tie.
Yeah, 9-7-1 going into the playoffs. So it's like honestly, I feel like there should at least be like that 10 win threshold where you're like barely 500. You're a game and a half above 500. But I feel like overall Sirianni, just the way he turned around a franchise in 2 years, and he had a similar situation to what Dayball did last year. People were unsure about Jalen Hurts, and then his team got hot towards the end of the season and made the playoffs. So it's like, well, if we're gonna give it to Dayball this year, why didn't we give it to Sirianni last year? And like
I
you
can agree
can
with
make the
that.
same argument. So it's like I feel like it should be one of the coaches from the four most dominant teams.
Yeah, it depends on how they build their team though, because the Eagles they had a lot of talent on defense. They had that AJ Brown trade, so I think people looking ahead kind of figured like this team's going to be pretty good,
Right.
and they did exceed expectations. But I think because the Giants were supposed to be a top 5 overall pick to making the playoffs, beating the Vikings, that I see the vision.
Yeah, but I feel like if we're gonna base it off of expectations for awards and like for as far as coaching, like let's look at the metrics and the stats if we're gonna do that for quarterbacks. Like look at where the Eagles offense is ranked in the NFL, passing, rushing, where their defense is ranked as a unit and their special teams and their play calling and time of possession, third down conversions. Like if we're gonna make it on like overperforming, then obviously why didn't Trevor Lawrence win the MVP? Because he overperformed this year. No one expected the Jags to win the Super Bowl. It's like if you do it with a player argument, doesn't make sense. And I feel like it should be the same standard for a coach.
I think they should have a most improved player in the NFL, which kind of reminds me
Yeah.
because they have that in the NBA. And if we're talking about most improved, then Trevor Lawrence probably would have won that award. MVP is more of a dominance award, and Coach of the Year, it's kind of a vague term because it's like,
Yeah.
who was the Coach of the Year? Well, Coach of the Year, I mean, like the last 20 years, you could have given it to Belichick many times, could have
Yeah.
given it to Andy Reid more often than not. But it's like, it has kind of that storyline arc to it, kind of like the MVP does, where it's
Yeah.
like, what's the best story? Patty Mahomes winning a second Super Bowl. Well, I'm sorry, winning a second MVP after he lost Tyreek Hill, compared to like Jalen Hurts, where had that massive ascendance, but like it wasn't as like captivating. Like even when Lamar won the MVP, it's like he had the rushing record, or when when Aaron Rodgers won, it was just like he had the best stats and there wasn't really a lot of storylines behind it. So the coach of the year this year, the storyline just like, oh, this guy came from Buffalo and he made Daniel Jones not suck. Oh wow, this is crazy.
Yeah, but then you still have like Pete Carroll loses Russell Wilson, has a better season, fleeces the Denver Broncos, takes all their picks, and then makes Geno Smith, who you want to talk about Daniel Jones, Geno Smith is right there for a guy who's written off. People thought Geno Smith was worse. So it's like you want to talk about a guy who brought his team to a place of where they shouldn't have been. It's like let's throw Pete Carroll in there because if the Seahawks got matched up against the Vikings, I thought they probably could have beat them too.